I don't understand tier lists. Or more accurately, I don't find them in many cases to be valuable enough to warrant looking at or even considering when talking about a character. And in HSR specifically, I don't find a character's individual performance within the current MOC to be a valid indication of how good they are. And we're using Pridwin itself as an example. Even though, yes, they have an MOC ranking and a pure fiction ranking, we're going to focus primarily on the MOC ranking because I think that's what most people look at first and foremost. Because for the most part, MOC is just about how much damage you can deal and how versatile are you. Whereas pure fiction is a bit more about, hey, are you working with DOT this time? Are you working with just follow-up attacks this time? And so on. So there's a bit more shifting around here. I don't understand why we went from S to tier 0 and tier 0.5 and then tier 1 because for the most part I don't really understand the indication or split and separation of a 0.5 versus not. And if we're looking more closely at characters like Acheron and someone like Firefly, for example, it gets kind of weird. First and foremost, we have the positives of debuff, advance, break. These are things that I actually think are very nice because on a surface level you can look at them and see, oh, these are some nice benefits to have, or these are what the kit revolves around. In this instance it's break, and so on. But then you have the counterpoint of, well, Jingliu, for example, is very easy to build because she gets so many stats. That's both a pro and a con because she has stat overload in many cases. And that's not really considered. If you're looking at Firefly, SP Unfriendly is being listed as a negative trait, but you also need to consider that for Firefly in particular, 90% of her damage is reliant on Harmony MC being paired with her. And so as of right now, she's in a negative position, much more negative at least, than Acheron because Firefly is already losing out on one team slot because you need Harmony MC. Mind you, it's a good pairing, you kind of have to do it, but most other characters, if not all, are ranked on their solo performance, especially as a DPS. And so it kind of leads to a position to where, yeah, Firefly is good. She's fine and great with Harmony MC, and I understand the notion of placing them together because they are meant to be played together, especially considering Harmony MC doesn't really have a point otherwise. But when you compare that to every other character, it's a very unfair comparison to make because you are allowing this one unit to be buffed up by somebody else and everybody else is normally considered just for their solo damage. Even if we're ignoring that, we also need to consider that a lot of these individual placements, at least especially for any of these DPSs, and I will be considering the specialist here as DPSs because even though they do rely on something else or do work around a core mechanic, for the most part they're meant to deal damage. Whereas everybody over here, you could pull for anybody on this side and they are bringing value to your account. Even if you don't have follow-up attack units, Robin is still decent enough, and if you get one in the future, like Clara for example, Robin holds significant value for that team, and for that character particularly, or Yunli in the future. With DPSs, obviously it makes sense to rank them on damage. Hey, Acheron does more damage than IL or Jingliu, that's fine. But it also comes into play, how easy are they to build? What teams differ? Jingliu is, for instance, very easy to build because she gives us so much crit. Whereas Firefly doesn't really have that many teammates that can pair with her. Yes, you want Harmony MC, you can go Ranma, you can go Pella, but she revolves around one core mechanic. At the same time, if we're looking at, hey, what can they do? Jingliu and IL are very flexible damage options. If we're just looking at that individual roster here, Acheron, yeah, she can work Mono Quantum if we really want her to, and I think it's in most situations to her best team, even at E0. But yeah, she will get more value with other units like Jacques. For somebody like Jingliu, or even IL, these are characters that, what happened with your light cone? Oh, it's on Firefly. And I will be pulling for Firefly's light cone anyway. But regardless of circumstance, these are units that, regardless as to what you're doing, do deal significant damage because they don't rely on one core mechanic. Geo is reliant on, yes, getting into enhanced states. Once you have that, cool, you're great. Whereas IL just wants the skill points. Fine. If you don't have Sparkle, if you don't have characters who can restore skill points or at least increase their speed enough to where they're doing basics very often, then you're in a position to where, yeah, they fall off, at least in his case, and Jingliu falls off if she's not in her enhanced state. Whereas somebody like Sealy revolved entirely around the concept of, hey, I need to kill my enemy to move on again. And so when I'm looking at Firefly and I'm looking at these other characters, it's more about, hey, do they have any situations where they're absolutely worthless? Blade, for example, if you give this man a shield, he is doing nothing for your account because he is not taking damage. And comparatively speaking to somebody like Clara, Blade relies on being damaged. He needs to take damage or consume his own HP. Mind you, this works and is why he pairs super well with characters like Jingliu, who do that anyway. But Clara can be hit in any capacity, even if she has a shield. And so Blade gets less value from shields on your account, which is kind of why he doesn't get paired super often as just a flex spot like Clara does. But Firefly, if you can't break the enemy, which admittedly, hey, you won't be dealing with a lot, does lose value. Acheron does depend on debuffs, but you can just apply a debuff even if it's removed, you still get that stack. All of this is just to say, tier lists make no fucking sense. Because regardless of the circumstance, if you're looking at it from a singular DPS option of how much damage do you deal by yourself, then this list entirely rearranges itself. Because Acheron is getting no stacks without her E2 and her light cone, and even then it's still less stacks. Firefly is doing fuck all for the team, because she, as an individual unit, doesn't and is not capable of breaking as often and doing as much damage as she needs to whilst the enemy is broken, because Secret Break doesn't really do fucking much for her without Harmony MC, which is, it's still stupid, but you know. With Jingliu and IL, Jingliu's biggest issue is that, yeah, she just needs 2 skills, and she's fine, she can basic between that. But IL needs 3 skill points, and that's very difficult to get. And I understand not many of you, or any of you, will ever be pairing these units just by themselves, but it's still a very different pool. Because if you have the units to make someone work, your list here looks wholly different. Jingliu has the issue right now of there isn't a team that really wants her. She gives herself a bunch of crit. She gives herself a bunch of attack. She gives herself a bunch of crit, rate, and damage. And so as a result, that Sparkle doesn't really hold much value for her. Bronya doesn't really hold much. You can reduce defense with characters like Pella and characters like Ron Mei, sure. But characters like Pella and Ron Mei also work for pretty much every other character. And so it becomes situations where, yeah, Jingliu is great, don't get me wrong, but she's not really excelling as of right now. And Sealy was good, but Sealy's entire team just works better if you put in Acheron. IL works great, but IL wants skill points, and so he needs Sparkle. Well, Sparkle works great with pretty much any character on the roster. And so it's a weird position to be in, because I think if you look at this, and let's say hypothetically speaking, you don't pay attention to how to use a character, or more aptly, you don't pay attention to what your current roster looks like and the investment you put into characters, whether that be Lycones, Eidolons, or Relics, then yeah, if you are using your original characters, i.e. maybe you have a Sealy, a Blade, and you like Argenti and so on, then this feels like shit, because you look here and none of your characters are good anymore, apparently. But they aren't bad, because if you already have those core teams built and they work really well and that investment is already there, then Firefly is going to take a while to ramp up to that point, especially if you don't build your MC at fucking all. Acheron wants more debuffers for Nahi, and if you don't have them built, if you don't use them, Acheron falls off a bit. Jingliu and IL follow that same pursuit. And so even with DOT looks good, but then you have to consider that DOT kind of relies on you having that full package. Even though, yes, characters like Black Swan, characters like Kafka are good, they are really good with each other, and more specifically, Kafka's kind of necessary for DOT to even work to its full potential. And so this just means, in overall summary, tier lists are fucking stupid, because it doesn't matter. Objectively speaking, yes, you can look at a character, and if you're just looking at them for the damage or for the support that they offer, cool, great, but there's also niches where a lot of individuals can perform extremely well in. Bronya is exceptional if you need to cleanse, and her crit damage buff for the whole party is a lot times more useful than just a singular crit damage buff of a higher potential. If you're using someone like Jingliu and Blade together, then Bronya's party-wide crit damage buff is a bit more beneficial than just boosting up Jingliu herself. Fu Shan is great because of the buff she provides you with, but if she's not surviving and cannot heal, then these healers hold much more value. Luocha is extremely good for the amount of scaling he has in regards to his Eidolons. If you want to hyper invest and vertically invest into a character, Luocha is exceptional. Whereas Fu Xuan and Huohuo only have really good E1s, and once you get further beyond that, it's kind of meh. Whereas everybody in the Harmony roster is exceptionally good. Even the debuffer Nihility roster of Silverwolf is still fine. And so you need to consider at the same time, hey, if you already have this character, hypothetically speaking, you already have a unit that you like a lot. Maybe you like Acheron, maybe you've invested into Silverwolf, maybe you've invested into these other characters like Jingliu. Then the investment you have into them, Eidolon-wise or Lightcone-wise, can make a dramatic difference. Jingliu has really good scaling with other defense reduction characters because she already ignores defense here. And so, as a result, if you get Xiaoqui, if you get a Ron Mei, if you're getting an E1 Ron Mei in particular or an E2 Sparkle, you are getting a better Jingliu as a result of that. Whereas if you're fucking around with a character who is E0 or S0, then yeah, from a base comparison, Pridwin makes sense because Pridwin calculates characters based on them without their light cone the vast majority of the time. If we're looking at Firefly, she's using On the Fall of an A and just Harmony MC. But if you're comparing single target damage of Firefly by herself with On the Fall of an Aeon to Acheron, then yeah, okay, that's a bit more comparable. So overall, don't use tier lists. They don't make sense. And at the same time also, just to be honest, don't listen to content creators' opinions of characters. Because for the most part, a character is good for that patch they're good in. We can all remember Jing Yuan being amazing and broken for like the month he was released, and now he's just here. And Blade too. How many of you legitimately still use Blade on your account? I'm not saying he's a bad unit, I'm just saying there aren't many situations to where he excels at to be worthwhile to get. or it's worthwhile to invest into. Even if we're looking at the scaling he has, he's really good if you have Path of the Abundance in Simulated Universe. But beyond that, I mean, even if you're looking at calculation-wise, the calculations are unfair because Blade here and most other characters are just considered, hey, how much are you doing with this free-to-play light cone? Whereas Acheron has her free-to-play and Essential listed, and Firefly has her free-to-play option, but also Harmony MC listed. So it's not really even a fair comparison in most circumstances. Firefly's one single target character, and it's a whole thing. I think Pridwin is a fine resource, don't get me wrong, but I don't think following tier lists religiously, and more specifically, following content creators' opinions of characters religiously is a good idea in any capacity, because yeah, first day or first week, you're gonna see this character is broken most of the time. HSR is not Genshin. Genshin, you can see a lot of people who are like, yeah, Claren's good. Or, yeah, she's alright, but she's worse Raiden in most circumstances. That is a fine opinion. Whereas in HSR, it's a bit more of a, this character's really good, and a character's value is only determined by how good are they beyond the first 3 months of their release. Because we've seen these characters fall off really hard. Even if we're looking at pure fiction, Argenti isn't even as good as he should have been for a character that was released primarily for pure fiction. And we have Yun Li, who's a lot like Clara. Clara's really good, so then you have to consider, well, do you want to invest into Yun Li if you already have a hyper investment into Clara? I, for instance, adore my Clara. She's very heavily invested into. She's also E2 and S2. I like this character. So Yun Li holds less value. If you are in a position to where your teams are going to be needing the exact same characters, it's maybe time to consider either A, a new DPS that requires different support that you already have access to, or B, new supports to swap out with. For me right now, I have a bunch of healers. My main team is just this one with Acheron, but everybody on that team is hyper invested into. So Firefly would need her hyper investment. And Jingliu, I would really like defense reduction or defense ignore, because to be blunt, fucking Blade isn't doing shit. He just exists on the account as just some guy. Overall, the TLDR, tier lists suck. Don't look at damage calculations because 90% of the time they aren't really useful. They don't really provide you with the full picture of how often are you doing your burst, how much damage are you dealing over the entire rotation, how likely are you to even get to this point, because if a character doesn't get their burst up, it doesn't fucking matter. How inclined is the game to say fuck your burst or fuck the entire point of your character? You don't get to weakness break. You don't get to break my weakness at all in order to deal additional damage, or you don't get to kill my enemy so that way you can get a resurgent proc. It's weird how a lot of other characters, if you have IL with Sparkle and suddenly Sparkle gets imprisoned, fuck your IL, I guess. And this extends beyond that. Either way, I just wanted to ramble, I guess. I haven't had sleep in like 24 hours, my guy. I am not in the proper state, but apparently rambling is what I do now. Next, expect a video on the fox mating season of Gensho, because I want to make that. And I'll see you next time. Goodbye.